The Grand Conclave Chamber was the largest room ever built by living hands. It floated at the heart of Station Aetheris, a city-sized structure that orbited a dying star at the center of known space. 312 species sent their representatives here. 312 voices spoke in this room, and for 40 years, one of those voices had belonged to humanity. Ambassador Ilara Voss sat in her chair and watched the vote happen for the 7th time. The holographic display above the central platform showed the results in bright, cold light. The question was the same as it had been 6 times before. Should humanity be given a permanent seat on the Security Directorate, the inner circle that made the real decisions for the galaxy? And the answer, once again, was no. 241 species voted against. 59 voted in favor. 12 chose not to vote at all. High Arbiter Zelkaron stood at the central platform. He was ancient, even by the standards of his kind. His insectoid body was covered in ceremonial armor that clicked and rattled when he moved. His 4 eyes looked out across the chamber with the calm satisfaction of someone who had gotten exactly what he wanted. "The vote is clear," Zelkaron said. His voice was translated instantly into every language in the room. "The Security Directorate will remain as it has always been. We thank the human delegation for their continued interest, and we remind them, as we have before, that younger species must learn patience. In time, all things come to those who wait." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through parts of the chamber. Ilara heard it. She had heard it 6 times before. She looked down at her hands, which rested flat on the table in front of her. They were perfectly still. Beside her, her aide Marcus leaned over. "Ambassador, do you want me to prepare the usual statement?" "No," Ilara said. "Not today." She stood up. The movement was small, but something about it made the laughter die. Perhaps it was the way she stood, not fast, not slow, but with a kind of heaviness that suggested something final. "The chair recognizes Ambassador Voss of the Terran Coalition," Zelkaron said, though his tone made it sound like he was doing her a favor. Ilara looked around the chamber. She looked at the Sci-Fi delegation, whose people had been starving until human agricultural engineers redesigned their irrigation networks. She looked at the Keloth cluster, whose civil war had ended only because human mediators spent 3 years living in a war zone to broker peace. She looked at the Eloi, whose children were alive because human doctors had developed a cure for a plague that had killed millions. None of them had voted yes. 40 years ago, Ilara began, and her voice was calm and clear, humanity joined this council. We were told that membership meant partnership, that it meant equality, that every species, regardless of age or origin, would be valued for what it contributed. She paused. In those 40 years, human peacekeeping forces have served in 63 conflict zones across Council space. We did not start any of those conflicts. We ended them. Human medical teams have responded to 114 planetary emergencies. We developed treatments for diseases that were not our own, for species we had never met, because we were asked to help, and we said yes. The chamber was very quiet now. Human engineers built the navigation systems that keep your trade routes stable. Human scientists designed the early warning networks that protect your borders. Human diplomats wrote the framework for the very charter this council operates under. We did all of this while being told again and again that we were too young, too new, too human. She reached into her jacket and took out a small data chip. It was no bigger than a coin. She placed it on the table in front of her with a soft click that somehow echoed through the entire chamber. "This is a formal notice of withdrawal," Ilara said. "Effective immediately, the Terran Coalition is leaving the Galactic Council." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Zelkaron made a sound that was the insectoid version of a laugh. "Ambassador Voss, this is dramatic but unnecessary. If this is about the vote, I assure you that—" It is not about the vote, Ilara said, and something in her voice made the High Arbiter stop. The vote is a symptom. The disease is that this council has taken everything humanity has offered, and it has given nothing in return but contempt. We fed your hungry, we healed your sick, we defended your borders, and you laughed at us. She looked directly at Zelkaron. You told us to know our place. We do now. Ilara turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, Marcus and the rest of the human delegation rose and followed. Their footsteps were the only sound in the chamber. Councillor Dreth Amarai of the Sithari Dominion watched them go. He was a tall reptilian figure with scales the color of dark copper. His face showed nothing, because Sithari faces were not built to show things, but his claws gripped the edge of his table hard enough to scratch the surface. At the Elohi section, a young aide named Talvesi watched with wide, glowing eyes. She was barely an adult by her people's standards, but she had spent the last 2 years studying humanity's contributions to the Council as part of her academic work. She knew the numbers. She knew what those numbers meant. Around her, the delegates began to talk and laugh. The Keloth ambassador called it a tantrum. The Morvathi delegation said humanity would come crawling back within a month. Someone made a joke about short-lived species and short tempers. Talvesi did not laugh. She looked at the data chip still sitting on the table, where Ilara had left it. Nobody had picked it up. Nobody had even looked at it. She whispered to herself, so quietly that nobody heard. They have no idea what they just lost. Outside the chamber, Ilara Voss walked through the long corridor that led to the human docking bay. Her delegation followed in silence. Marcus fell into step beside her. Ambassador, he said quietly, what happens now? Ilara did not slow down. She did not look back. Now, she said, they find out what it costs to lose us. The human ships undocked from Station Aetheris 1 hour later. They turned toward Sol and engaged their drives, and within minutes they were gone. The docking bays they left behind were empty and dark. Nobody in the council filled them. At the time, nobody thought they needed to. That was the first mistake. 6 months after humanity left the Galactic Council, the first ships started arriving late. It began with small things. A cargo vessel carrying medical supplies to the outer colonies missed its delivery window by 2 days. A grain shipment bound for the Keloth agricultural stations arrived at the wrong system entirely. A fuel tanker dropped out of faster-than-light travel in empty space, its navigation systems confused and blinking with errors. Nobody panicked at first. Shipping delays happened. Systems made mistakes. These things were normal. But then the delays got longer, and the mistakes got worse. The truth, which nobody in the council wanted to admit, was simple. Humanity had built 63% of the navigation software that guided ships through faster-than-light corridors. Human engineers had designed the corridor stabilizers that kept the trade routes safe and predictable. And human maintenance crews, stationed across hundreds of relay points, had kept everything running smoothly for decades. All of that was gone now. The software still worked, but it was old and it needed updates that nobody else knew how to write. The stabilizers still functioned, but they were drifting out of alignment, and nobody else knew how to fix them. The maintenance stations were dark and empty. Within 3 months of the first delays, the entire Western trade network had slowed to half speed. Within 5 months, 2 major corridors had shut down completely after a series of navigation failures caused 3 ships to collide in transit. 800 crew members died. The cargo they carried, food, medicine, building materials, never arrived. On the Sithari homeworld, Councillor Dreth Amarai stood in his private office and stared at a screen full of reports he did not want to read. Food shortages in the outer territories, medical supply chains breaking down. His people were not starving yet, but they would be soon if things did not change. He picked up a secure communication device and entered a frequency that very few people knew, a back channel to human diplomatic services. He kept his message short and professional. He asked, carefully, if perhaps some informal arrangement could be made. Technical assistance, perhaps. Maintenance support. Nothing official. The reply came 12 hours later. It was one line. Per your council's wishes, we know our place. Dreth read it 3 times. Then he put the device down and said nothing for a very long time. Things got worse. On the far side of council space, the Varathi hegemony had been watching. The Varathi were not members of the council. They were an aggressive, expansionist power that had spent decades pressing against council borders, testing, probing, looking for weakness. For years, they had found none, because human rapid response fleets had been stationed along the border. Fast, well-armed, and unpredictable, the human ships had made the Varathi cautious. Those ships were gone now. The Varathi sent scout vessels into council territory for the first time in 20 years. When nobody challenged them, they sent more. When nobody fought back, they sent warships. They seized a mining outpost in the Drenari system. They destroyed a communication relay near the border. They sent a message to the council that said, simply, "We are coming." The council ordered its own fleets to respond, but council fleets were built for show, not for war. They were large and impressive and very slow. They had been designed to look powerful at diplomatic ceremonies, not to fight. The real fighting had always been done by humans. And then the plague came. It started on Eloi Prime, the beautiful ocean-covered homeworld of the Eloi people. A fungal infection, carried by a contaminated water shipment, began spreading through the coastal cities. The Eloi immune system had no defense against it. Within weeks, millions were sick. Within a month, thousands were dying. The Eloi had a treatment for this kind of infection. It was a gene therapy system, highly advanced and very effective. It had been developed by human biomedical researchers 15 years ago, designed specifically for Eloi biology. It had saved countless lives since then. But the fungal strain was new, and the therapy needed to be adapted. That required human expertise, the same human biomedical teams that had created the system in the first place. The Eloi reached out to the council for help. The council reached out to its own scientists. The scientists looked at the human-designed system, shook their heads, and said they did not understand how it worked well enough to modify it. On Eloi Prime, people kept dying. Tal Vesey watched it happen from her small apartment in the capital city. She had resigned from her government position 3 months earlier, unable to sit through any more meetings where officials blamed humans for leaving instead of asking why they left. She spent her days now working on something else, a document, growing longer every week, that tracked every system, every technology, every service that humanity had provided to the council. The list was terrifying. Navigation systems, medical treatments, agricultural techniques, diplomatic frameworks, communication protocols, energy distribution networks, water purification methods, emergency response plans. The deeper she looked, the more she found. Humanity had not just been a member of the council. Humanity had been the foundation the council was built on. And nobody had noticed because the work had been done quietly, without complaint, without recognition. She finished the document late one night, sitting alone in her dark apartment, while the sound of emergency sirens echoed across the city outside. She saved it and stared at the screen. Back on Station Aetheris, High Arbiter Zelkoron addressed the council. His speech was long and filled with complicated words that meant very little. He called the current difficulties minor logistical adjustments. He said the council was fully capable of managing its own affairs. He blamed the trade disruptions on outdated systems and the border incursions on routine provocations. He did not mention humanity once. At the end of his speech, he issued a formal order. No delegation was to contact humanity for any reason. The council would solve its own problems. The chamber voted to approve the order. The margin was smaller this time. Only 180 species voted yes. 90 voted no. The rest chose not to vote at all. After the session, Dreth Amorai walked through the corridors of Station Aetheris, alone. He passed the empty docking bays where human ships had once been parked. He stopped and looked at the dark, quiet space. A cleaning drone moved past him, sweeping the floor of a bay that nobody used anymore. Dreth thought about the message he had received. Per your council's wishes, we know our place. He thought about the Varathi ships on the border. He thought about the Eloi dying of a plague that humans could cure. He thought about the trade routes falling apart, the food shortages, the fear that was starting to spread through council space like a disease of its own. He thought about the laughter in the chamber 6 months ago when Alara Voss had placed that small data chip on the table. 18 months after humanity walked out of the Galactic Council, the galaxy looked like two different places depending on which direction you faced. If you looked toward Sol, toward Earth and its colonies, you saw something remarkable. Freed from the heavy taxes and resource-sharing agreements that council membership demanded, humanity had turned inward. Every credit, every scientist, every ship that had once been spent on solving other species' problems was now being used at home. And the results were extraordinary. 3 new colony worlds had been settled in a single year. Human scientists cracked a new method of energy production that made their old reactors look like campfires. Factories that had once built emergency shelters for alien refugees now built homes for human families. Hospitals that had trained doctors to treat alien biology now focused on extending human lifespans. The economy was booming. Unemployment had dropped to near zero. People were happy. They called it the Reclamation. It was the greatest period of growth in human history, and it showed no signs of slowing down. If you looked the other way, toward council space, you saw something very different. 3 species had formally left the council. They were small, quiet civilizations that depended heavily on trade. And when the trade routes collapsed, they decided that council membership was no longer worth the cost. 12 more species were in open disputes with each other over resources, food, fuel, raw materials that humanity had once helped distribute fairly. Without human mediators, every negotiation turned into an argument, and every argument turned into a threat. The Varathi had seized 2 border systems completely. Their warships sat in those systems like wolves that had found a hole in a fence, watching and waiting and growing bolder every day. And on Eloi Prime, the plague had killed over 2 million people before the Eloi scientists finally managed a partial adaptation of the human gene therapy. It worked, but poorly. It saved lives, but not all of them, not nearly enough. In the middle of all this, High Arbiter Zelkaron made a decision that would later be called the greatest miscalculation in galactic political history. He sent a message to Earth. It was not a request. It was not an invitation. It was a demand. The formal language of the communiqué stated that humanity had obligations arising from prior agreements and was expected to resume its contributions to the collective welfare of Council space. The message was sent through official diplomatic channels, stamped with the seal of the High Arbiter, and delivered to the office of the Secretary of Interstellar Affairs on Earth. That office was now led by Alara Voss. She read the message in her office in Geneva, sitting behind a desk that looked out over a lake, where the morning light made the water shine like silver. She read it once, then again, then a third time. Then she picked up her communication device and called a press conference. The broadcast went out live to every planet, station, and ship in known space. Council channels carried it, independent networks carried it, even the Varathi picked it up. Alara stood behind a simple podium with the flag of the Terran Coalition behind her. She held up her personal screen and read Zelkoron's message aloud, word by word, in its entirety. The demand, the obligations, the expectation that humanity would simply come back and resume its role as the galaxy's unpaid workforce. When she finished reading, she lowered the screen. Then she picked up a second document and read it aloud as well. It was the record of the Council's 7 votes denying humanity a seat on the Security Directorate. She read the dates. She read the vote counts. She read Zelkoron's own words from each session, the references to younger species, the reminders about patience, the polite dismissals wrapped in polished language. When she finished the second reading, she looked directly into the camera. "The Terran Coalition has received the High Arbiter's message," she said. "We have no obligations to fulfill. We have no contributions to resume. We wish the Council well." She closed the channel. Across Council space, billions of beings watched that broadcast. Some were angry. Some were ashamed. Many were afraid. On Station Aetheris, Zelkoron watched it alone in his private chamber and said nothing. His aides reported later that he sat motionless for 3 hours after the broadcast ended. 2 weeks later, a small ship arrived at the edge of human space. It carried no weapons. It flew no national flag. Its only passenger was a young Eloise woman with skin that glowed faintly blue in the darkness of space. Tal Vessi had left everything behind: her home, her people, her career. She carried with her only one thing of value: a data file containing the document she had spent a year building. Every system humanity had created for the Council, every technology they had shared, every contribution that had been taken for granted and forgotten. She requested asylum at the first human border station she reached. The officers who met her were surprised. In 18 months, no alien had come to human space voluntarily. They processed her request and asked why she had come. "Because my people are dying," she said, "and the Council would rather let them die than admit it was wrong. I will not be part of that." She offered her document freely, without conditions. "This is everything," she said, "everything humanity did for us. I compiled it so that someone, somewhere, would have a record, so that the truth would exist, even if nobody wanted to hear it." The document was forwarded to Alara Voss, who read it in one sitting. When she finished, she sat quietly for a long time. The document confirmed what she already knew, but seeing it written down, seeing the full scope of what humanity had given and what the Council had thrown away, still hit her harder than she expected. She authorized Tal Vessi's asylum request personally. Meanwhile, on the Sithari homeworld, Counselor Dreth Amarai was busy with something dangerous. For months, he had been reaching out quietly to other delegations, species that were unhappy with the Council, species that recognized the truth, species that were tired of watching everything fall apart while Zelkoron pretended nothing was wrong. He called his group the Honest Accord, and it now included 30 species. They met in secret, communicated through encrypted channels, and agreed on one fundamental point. The Council had wronged humanity, and the only way to survive was to admit it. Dreth opened back-channel negotiations with Earth. This time, he did not ask for help. He simply said, "We know what we did. We are sorry. We would like to talk." The humans did not say no, but they did not say yes either. They said they would listen. It was a small thing, a crack of light under a closed door. But it was the first honest communication between the two sides, since Alara Voss had walked out of the Grand Conclave chamber. And for those who understood what was happening, it felt like the first breath after a long time underwater. On Station Aetheris, Zelkoron sensed the shift. He could feel his authority weakening, feel the ground moving under his feet. He issued new orders, stricter controls on communication, harsher penalties for unauthorized contact with humans, more speeches about strength and independence. But his words were hollow now, and everyone knew it. The galaxy was breaking, and no amount of speeches could hold it together. The cracks that had started small were growing wider every day. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the failing trade routes and the dying worlds and the empty promises, the lights of human space burned brighter than ever. 2 years after humanity left, the Varathi came. Not the probing raids of before, not the cautious scouts or the stolen outposts. This was a full invasion, a war fleet of over 6,000 ships, moving in 3 columns across the border, like a wave of dark metal. They hit 3 Council core worlds simultaneously, worlds that held billions of lives and centuries of civilization. The Council scrambled its response. Every available warship was pulled from patrol duty, from escort missions, from defensive positions. They assembled the largest fleet the Council had ever gathered. Over 4,000 ships from dozens of species, painted in the colors of races that had spent the last 2 years arguing about food supplies and trade disputes. The battle lasted 9 hours. It was a disaster. Council ships were large and powerful, but they had never fought together as a unified force. Each species had its own command structure, its own communication protocols, its own tactics. Human officers had once served as the bridge between all of these differences, coordinating movements, translating orders, keeping the entire machine running smoothly. Without them, the fleet was not an army, it was a crowd. The Varathi cut through them with terrible efficiency. Council ships fired on each other by accident. Formations fell apart within minutes. Retreat orders were given in languages that other ships could not translate fast enough. By the time it was over, the Council had lost 1,100 ships and nearly 500,000 crew members. The Varathi lost 200 ships. They considered it a good trade. The 3 core worlds fell within days. Billions of beings were now under Varathi occupation, and the Council had no way to take them back. On Station Aetheris, the mood was beyond panic. It was the silence of an animal that knows it has been caught. Delegations argued and screamed and blamed each other in the Grand Conclave Chamber. 3 more species announced their withdrawal. The Honest Accord, Dreth's secret coalition, was no longer secret. Its members openly demanded Zelkaron's removal. The vote of no confidence came on a cold, quiet morning. Zelkaron stood at his platform, and for the first time in anyone's memory, he looked old. Not ancient and powerful the way he always had, but simply old, tired, beaten. He lost the vote by a wide margin. He was stripped of his title, removed from his position, and escorted out of the chamber by his own guards. The doors closed behind him, and just like that, the most powerful being in the galaxy was nobody. But losing Zelkaron did not solve anything. The Varathi were still advancing. The fleet was still broken. The core worlds were still occupied. And the Council, now leaderless on top of everything else, had no idea what to do. That night, from a small room in the lower levels of Station Aetheris, Zelkaron did something he had never done before. He sat alone at a communication terminal, entered a frequency he had sworn no one would ever use, and typed a message to Alara Voss. It was not a demand. It was not a formal communique dressed in diplomatic language. It was short, and it was personal, and it contained a word that no High Arbiter had ever used in the recorded history of the Conclave. Ambassador Voss, I was wrong. My pride has cost lives that I can never return. I do not ask for myself. I ask for the billions who suffer because of my failure. Please. The message arrived on Earth at 3 a.m, Geneva time. Her aide woke her, and she read it sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark. She read it again. Then she got dressed and went to work. because there was a decision to make, and it was the hardest one of her life. The debate that followed shook humanity to its core. When word spread, and it spread fast, that the council was begging for help, the reaction was immediate and divided. Half of humanity said no. They said it with anger, with old wounds, with the memory of 40 years of insults and dismissals. They said the council had made its choice, and now it could live with the consequences. They said humanity owed nothing to people who had taken everything and given nothing back. Online, the phrase "Know your place" became a rallying cry for those who wanted to let the council burn. The other half said yes, but not with joy. They said it with heaviness, with reluctance, with the painful awareness that doing the right thing and doing the easy thing were almost never the same. They pointed to the billions under Varathi occupation. They pointed to the children. They said that letting innocents die to punish their leaders was not justice. It was cruelty wearing a mask. Elara Voss listened to all of it. She read the messages that poured in from across human space. Furious, pleading, thoughtful, ugly, beautiful. She met with military commanders and economists and philosophers and ordinary citizens. She sat in meetings that lasted 18 hours and went home to stare at the ceiling until morning. She thought about the grand conclave chamber. She thought about the laughter. She thought about Zelkoran's voice telling her that younger species should know their place. She thought about every time she had offered humanity's hand and had it slapped away. And then she thought about Eloi Prime. She thought about the children's hospital she had visited there years ago, where kids with glowing blue skin had held her hands and called her Star Ant because they could not pronounce ambassador. She thought about the Scythari farmers who had wept when human engineers brought water to their dying fields. She thought about every person across every world who had never sat in the Grand Conclave Chamber, who had never voted against humanity, who had never laughed. She made her decision. The United Terran Parliament was called into emergency session. Every seat was filled. The galleries were packed. The broadcast went out to every human world. Elara stood at the podium. She was not wearing her old ambassador's uniform. She wore simple black. She looked tired, but her voice was steady. 2 years ago, I walked out of the Galactic Council because they refuse to see our worth. They see it because they are losing everything, and they have finally realized that we were the ones holding it together. She paused. Many of you want me to let them fall. I understand. I have felt that anger. I have lived in it. There is a part of me that wants to send Zelkoran's message back with the same words he once gave us. Another pause, longer this time. But that is not who we are. It has never been who we are. We did not help the galaxy for 40 years because the Council asked us to. We did it because people needed help, and we were able to give it. That has not changed. The people out there, the ones under occupation, the ones who are sick, the ones who are afraid, they did not vote against us. They did not laugh at us. They are just people, and they need help. She took a breath. They did not deserve us then. They may not deserve us now. But since when has humanity only helped people who deserved it? The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the vote was called. It passed. Not unanimously, not easily, but it passed. Within 48 hours, the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled began forming in orbit above Earth. These were not the old ships that had served the Council. 2 years of independent development had produced something new, faster, stronger, more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. They flew under a new banner, one that had been designed overnight and approved by morning. The Terran Humanitarian Expeditionary Force. The fleet turned toward the darkness, where the Varathi waited, and it began to move. The Varathi fleet commander was named Dralketh, and he had spent 30 years waiting for this moment. He had watched the council from beyond its borders his entire career, studying it, hating it, planning for the day when its defenses would finally crack. When humanity left, he had known immediately that the time had come. He had been right. The council's fleet had crumbled before him like wet paper, and now 3 core worlds knelt under his flag. He was confident. He was proud. He had 6,000 warships, battle-tested and hungry, spread across 3 occupied systems in a defensive formation that he considered unbreakable. Then his sensors officer reported a new fleet entering the sector. Drolketh looked at the readings, and for the first time in 30 years, felt something cold move through his chest. The human fleet numbered 2,000 ships. That was less than half of what the Varathi had. By every standard of military mathematics, it should not have been enough. But these ships were different. 2 years of independent development, 2 years of human ingenuity turned inward and unleashed without the burden of council politics, had produced vessels that the galaxy had never seen before. They were smaller than Varathi warships, but they were fast, impossibly fast, moving with a precision that made them look like a single organism rather than a fleet of separate ships. Their weapon systems operated on principles that Varathi sensors could not fully read. Their shields flickered with an energy signature that no database could match. The human fleet did not stop to negotiate. It did not send warnings or ultimatums. It simply arrived, arranged itself with quiet efficiency, and attacked. The Battle of the Varathi Line, as it would later be called, lasted 72 hours. In military academies across the galaxy, it would be studied for centuries. The humans fought the way they had always fought, not with brute force, but with coordination, adaptability, and a willingness to take risks that no other species would consider. Their ships moved in patterns that shifted every few minutes, never giving the Varathi a chance to predict their next move. They targeted command ships and communication relays first, cutting the Varathi fleet into isolated groups that could not coordinate their response. Drolketh tried everything. He ordered tight formations, and the humans flowed around them like water. He ordered dispersal, and the humans picked off his ships one by one. He ordered a retreat to consolidate his forces, and the humans were already there, waiting. By the end of the first day, the Varathi had lost 1,000 ships. By the end of the second day, they had lost 2,000 more. On the third day, Drolketh looked at what remained of his fleet, broken, scattered, burning, and gave the order to withdraw. The Varathi ran. They ran back across the border they had crossed with such confidence, back into their own space, back into the darkness. They left behind their dead, their wreckage, and 3 core worlds that they had held for weeks and lost in hours. When the last Varathi ship disappeared from sensors, something strange happened. Every communication channel in the galaxy went quiet. It was not a technical failure. It was not an accident. It was the silence of 300 species holding their breath at the same moment, processing what they had just witnessed. Humanity had come back. Humanity had won. And humanity had done it, not for power, not for revenge, not for territory, but because people needed help. Then the silence broke. It started with a single transmission from Eloe Prime, a pulse of light in the old Eloe tradition, a pattern that meant gratitude so deep it had no spoken word. Then the Scytheries sent a harmonic tone, a frequency that their culture reserved for honoring the fallen and the brave. Then the Keloth sent a mathematical sequence, a poem written in numbers, because the Keloth had no other way to express what they felt. One by one, then dozens at a time, then hundreds, the signals came in from every corner of the galaxy. Every species, every world, every station, messages of thanks transmitted towards Sol in every language, every format, every tradition that existed. Songs and light, and mathematics and silence, and colors and sounds that humans could not hear, but could feel in their bones. On the bridge of the flagship, the communications officer turned to the fleet commander with tears on her face. "Ma'am," she said, "I think the galaxy is saying thank you." The commander, a woman named Chen who had spent her entire career being told that humans were too young for leadership, looked out the viewport at the stars and said nothing for a long time. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy held its breath again, this time in a different way. Everyone waited to see what humanity would demand. The 3 core worlds were liberated. The Varathi were gone. Humanity held all the power, all the leverage, all the cards. They could have demanded anything: territory, tribute, absolute control. The old council would have given it, and everyone knew it. Ilara Voss arrived at Station Aetheris on a single diplomatic shuttle. She walked through corridors that she had last walked 2 years ago, with her head held high and her heart full of anger. This time, she walked slowly, and she was not angry. She was thoughtful. She was not alone. Beside her walked Tal Vessi, the young Eloise woman who had left everything behind to tell the truth. And beside Tal Vessi walked Dreth Amarai, the Sithari counselor who had swallowed his pride and built the honest accord when no one else would. The 3 of them entered the grand conclave chamber together. Every seat was filled. The room was silent. Ilara stood where Zelkaron had once stood, at the central platform, and she laid out humanity's terms. There would be no return to the old council. The old council was dead, and it deserved to be. In its place, humanity proposed something new: a galactic compact. Every species would hold equal standing, regardless of how old they were, how large their territory was, or how many people they had. Decisions would be made by genuine consensus, not by the votes of a powerful few. And the Security Directorate, the inner circle that had kept humanity out for 40 years, would no longer exist. Security would be everyone's responsibility, shared equally. As for humanity's own position, Ilara said something that made the chamber gasp. Humanity would take no special seat, no privileged status, no permanent leadership role. They would be one voice among many, the same as everyone else, not because they had to, because they chose to. Power is not the measure of a civilization, Ilara said. What you do when you have power, that is the measure. We could demand the galaxy today. Instead, we offer you a partnership, a real one this time. The compact was ratified within a month. 400 species signed it, more than the old council had ever held. The document was stored in the same chamber where Ilara had once placed her withdrawal chip, on the same table, in the same spot. Tal Vessi was elected as the compact's first chancellor. The vote was overwhelming. She was young, she was honest, and she had given up everything to stand for the truth when it was dangerous to do so. The galaxy decided that those were exactly the qualities they needed. On the day she took office, she stood at the platform in the Grand Conclave Chamber, now called the Assembly Hall, and looked out at 400 delegations seated as equals. The room was full of light and sound and life. It looked nothing like the cold, hierarchical space it had once been. "We are here today," she said, "not because we were strong enough to stand alone. We are here because one species was strong enough to come back. They came back not for glory, not for power, not for revenge. They came back because it was the right thing to do. And because doing the right thing is harder than doing the easy thing. And because they have always chosen the harder thing." She paused and looked toward the Terran delegation, where Ilara Voss sat in an ordinary chair, in an ordinary row, with no special markings and no elevated platform. Ilara met her eyes and gave a small nod. Tal Vessi smiled. "Let us be worthy of that choice." After the ceremony, In a quiet corridor away from the celebrations, a figure stepped out of the shadows and stood in Ilara's path. Zelkaron. He was smaller now, or perhaps he had always been small, and his title had made him seem larger. He wore no ceremonial armor. His 4 eyes looked at her with something she had never seen in them before. "Why?" he asked. His voice was thin. "After everything, after what I did, why did you come back?" Ilara looked at him for a long moment. She remembered his voice in the chamber, telling her to know her place. She remembered the laughter. She remembered the data chip on the table, and the long walk to the docking bay. "Because cruelty is easy, Arbiter," she said quietly. "We chose the harder thing." She walked past him, toward the light and noise of the celebration ahead. Behind her, Zelkoron stood alone in the corridor. He stood there for a very long time, and if anyone had been watching, they might have seen something that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. A High Arbiter, weeping. Outside, the stars burned on. The galaxy turned. And humanity, as it always had, moved forward, not because the road was easy, but because someone had to walk it first.